Welcome to The Briefing, your weekly debrief of top news by the Arizona Republic and azcentral.com. I'm Rafael Carranza. October 7th is the deadline for Arizona-eligible voters to register or to make changes to the registration. Early ballots will mail out 2 days later. Here are the top 3 things you need to know as we reach the final stretch of voter registration this election cycle. Republicans continue to hold a registration advantage in Arizona. According to the Secretary of State, there's 1.45 million registered GOP voters. Unaffiliated or independent voters make up 1.4 million voters, while Democrats account for 1.2 million of registered Arizona voters. Those numbers will look different in November. GOP-affiliated groups like Turning Point Action are seeking to maximize any advantage. They've deployed 1,000 field organizers in battlegrounds, including Arizona. Their goal is to register voters and chase ballots, knocking on the doors of early voters to ensure they send in their ballots. Democratic-leaning groups, meanwhile, are also stepping up their efforts in Arizona. They're seizing on increased enthusiasm from their Democratic candidate. The Together We Can coalition, which brings together Latino and Black community groups, for example, is pledging to register voters and knock on 3 million doors before Election Day to ensure they make a plan to cast their ballot. In recent weeks, serious questions about what you need to register to vote and who will be able to vote have surfaced. The Republic's Elections Watchdog reporter, Sasha Hupka, is here to break it all down for us and let us know what's happening. So first, let's talk about the Supreme Court ruling over the proof of citizenship question. What does that mean for Arizona voters?
So in Arizona, we require all voters to prove their citizenship to vote in state and local races. But they don't have to do that to vote in federal races. And the reason why is because we're the only state that requires voters to actually physically provide documentary proof. In all states, of course, you do have to be a U.S. citizen to vote. Because we're the only state that does that for the purpose of consistency, the courts have consistently ruled that we cannot block Arizonans who don't provide that proof of citizenship from voting in contests like the presidential race and congressional matchups. But the Supreme Court did recently rule that voters can't register as so-called federal-only voters using a state form. So previously, up until this ruling a few weeks ago, you could use either form, and if you didn't provide documentary proof of citizenship, you still would have been registered to vote in those federal races. Now you can only do it if you're using the federal form. This is something that some officials have worried might confuse voters and might disenfranchise some who don't realize that they can no longer use that state form and don't have time to fix that issue with their voter registration before the voter registration deadline, which is coming up on October 7th. That's something that could have, big impacts here in Arizona, a battleground state where every vote counts, especially in that key presidential race.
The driver's licenses many times act as your proof of citizenship, but there was a glitch that impacts about 100,000 voters who have not submitted proof of citizenship as required by state law. What we don't know about these voters?
We don't know if they have or if they haven't submitted proof of citizenship. It is very possible some of the voters caught in this glitch, which, by the way, is through no error of their own. This is entirely a glitch with the state system. This isn't something that the voters did wrong. But it's entirely possible that some of those voters did provide proof of citizenship. It's just that the election officials can't tell. In terms of what we know about these voters, we know that they are predominantly older, between about the ages of 45 and 60. We know most of them are Republicans, about 60% or so, although of course there are also independents and Democrats in the mix. And we know that they're pretty evenly spread across the state. So this didn't disproportionately impact one county or another. It's pretty proportional with where the population centers are in the state. So this is something that could be a really big deal for all of those races that maybe are a little bit less known to people nationally, but that are very important here in Arizona.
So what do Arizona voters need to know, especially with that October 7th deadline looming just a few days away?
Well, for all voters, I always recommend that you go to arizona.vote. You can do that no matter where you are in the state, or if you're a Maricopa County specific voter, go to beballotready.vote and check your voter registration just to make sure that you are registered, that your address is current, that you haven't moved and forgotten to register, to update your party preference if you'd like to do that, all of those things. Now, in terms of this glitch, officials are still working to gather more information about that. They've promised to notify voters that are impacted by that issue as soon as possible. They've also promised to, of course, find steps to try to fix that issue for those voters. And then with the Supreme Court issue, if you're a voter who recently tried to register to vote and you didn't submit documentary proof of citizenship, that's a passport, a birth certificate, a tribal ID card, with your voter registration, you might want to just check, reach out to your local county recorder and just check where you are in the process. But of course, with so many voters trying to register, so many changes across the state right now, sometimes just being proactive and reaching out to your local election officials is not a bad way to go.
Yeah, better to be safe. Thank you so much, Sasha. For the latest details about this whole saga, be sure to check azcentral.com or follow us on social media. Thank you for joining us on The Briefing, your weekly debrief of top news by the Arizona Republic and AZ Central. Have a great week.